Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and in this video we are going to discuss some news that came out actually a couple weeks ago now, but you may have missed or you may not have, and it is that group loot is coming in Dragonflight. And I just want to talk about what exactly this means and what the implications are for various different levels of guild, what sort of things are likely to be different about your experience in Dragonflight as compared to Shadowlands and BFA in this world of group loot coming back. So let's start off by just defining what is group loot. And it is basically when you kill a boss, you're going to all be able to roll on an item, right? So when you kill a raid boss, you work with 20 people, there's 5 items on the corpse, and you can roll for those items, you can pass on them, you can trade them to your friends. That's a world we think we want to be in again. They're still hammering out the details, but basically, the way that this will function in serious guilds is that you'll use the fact that everything's tradable, right? You're not gonna use just the RNG roll to determine which item goes where, but you will use a loot council of some kind and make the items go on whoever you want. So everybody will pass, and the loot master will take all the items or whatever and then trade them out accordingly, or you'll tell which person to roll need on it and everybody else to pass, that kind of thing. There will probably be an add-on that just auto passes for everybody, and then the right person gets all the items and can hand them out accordingly. That is how this will function in serious static raiding groups, right? Raiding groups where it's the same people that raid every week. It is a little bit of an open question how this will function in more pug environments or more casual guilds like that, because our current plan is to have raid bosses in Dragonflight work that way. So it's unclear whether personal loot is a option even, or if personal loot is just gone and you'll this is how raid loot works, because there are some cases where there's upside for personal loot. Especially if your raid group is heavily stacked towards a certain tier token, or if you have, no hunters, 10 hunters, that kind of thing. The smart loot of personal loot, right? Because the way personal loot works is it just rolls for each person, and then if the person gets loot, it gives them an item that they could get. So if you had 10 hunters in your raid, you could get 3 bows with personal loot. Whereas with this system, it's likely you're going to see 0 to 1 bows, and you might see a bow even if you have no hunters in your raid. So yeah, unclear whether personal loot will be an option. It is worth noting it's almost certainly going to be correct for guilds to use the group loot instead. This is a way, using this and assigning the items where you want them is more powerful than using personal loot. So there's going to be heavy pressure on guilds to use this system, even if they have a slight preference against it. Say you're you're a low tier cutting edge guild. You're one of the guilds that gets cutting edge late in a tier. You're generally, you raid 9 hours a week or something like that. And you don't really like the idea of loot drama. You don't really like the idea of doing a loot council. The problem is, if you don't use this loot system, there are going to be people in your guild that will be aware that you are leaving power on the table, right? That your raid is weaker than it could be. And so you're, A, going to be losing ranks relative to the guilds that do use group loot. And B, you're probably going to be losing players to those guilds, the players that want to kill the bosses as fast as possible, because killing the bosses as fast as possible is going to involve using the group loot system well. Now, what exactly does it mean to use the group loot system well? Well, there's a few implications here. Bad news is for tanks and healers. Tanks and healers generally are not going to be the best places for items to go, aside from shields, tank trinkets, that kind of stuff, healer trinkets, right? But whenever you get an intellect staff, that is almost always going to go on a warlock or a mage or something, and is not going to go on your disc priest or anything like that. Similarly, set bonuses you'll have a rough idea of where the biggest throughput set increases are. And generally, you're going to prioritize giving the set bonuses to those DPS players that get the most from them. We do know a little bit about the tier tokens. The tier tokens are going to continue to be the same as they were in Sepulcher, with Evoker joining the Zenith tier. So of this, Dreadful pretty likely going to be a Warlock specialty. Again, it depends on how much value the set bonuses actually give. You know, if DH or DK gets a huge set bonus, then maybe they could take the items from Warlocks. But I imagine that most raids will probably have a lot of Warlocks, 0 to 1 Death Knights, and 1 Demon Hunter. Similarly, the Venerated token. The Venerated token has very few traditional DPS classes in here. The enhancement shamans that we've been seeing a little bit recently, maybe elemental shaman next expansion, but there may be just only 1 or 2 DPS players on the venerated token, and so they'll be the first priority to receive those, and then the healers might be able to start getting tier at some point after that. And Mystic is looking pretty heavily contested among classes that usually have a lot of representation in raid, so figuring out which of the people on these tokens is going to be the highest priority for getting tier and which one's the second highest priority is going to be a big thing. But the main thing that you want in your raid is you want a balance, right? You want to make sure that you are not dropping Zenith tokens and not having anybody good for it to go on and having 12 people on the Mystic token. So much more important than in Sepulcher is going to be making sure that all of the good items that can drop from bosses have somebody good in your raid to go on. Hunter, for example, the bow example we were talking about earlier, right? You want to make sure that, first of all, like if you have a Hunter in your raid, it's going to be really hard for them to play something like Survival unless you have another Hunter that will actually play MM or BM, right? Because you want those bows and guns that drop to go on somebody useful, right? You don't want this loot to just evaporate, so that's going to be a little bit more pressure even towards making use of that. There's not really that much else like that. I guess Warglaves for Demon Hunters are the other example of fairly limited loot. And then beyond that, most things can go on a lot of different people. You're looking for a good balance in tier tokens. You're also looking for good balance in armor types. Mail wearers getting Evoker means that there'll probably be, historically, it's usually been like mail wearers that you don't have enough of and you drop mail loot and it's like, unlucky. But with Evokers joining, that should fix that a little bit. The other big implication of group loot is that split runs have become much more valuable. So historically, a split run like this in Shadowlands, a split run was something that was locked behind a very small set of guilds. And the way that a split run would function is, so what my guild did is the first week of Heroic, we ran 2 raids. We ran one raid, half mains, half alts, and the other raid, the other half mains, and the other half alts. The first week that you did this in Shadowlands, you got very little value, right? Because any item that dropped for an alt, they couldn't trade it. But then the second week that you did this, if an alt got an item, they could then trade that item potentially, right? Like there was a small chance they'd be able to trade it. The third week that you did this, the chance has gone up even more, right? Your alts actually have 4 pieces of 278 gear. If they drop another item in that slot, they can trade it. And so your luckiest alts get to start trading gear to your unluckiest mains after a few weeks of running splits. And effectively, you spend the time to do 2 heroic runs, and you get the loot of maybe 1.1, 1.2 heroic runs onto your mains. And that was something that was worth it for some guilds. My guild found it to be worth it, but, barely. Obviously, like Race to World First guilds were running 5 splits, and they were doing degenerate stuff with like getting helpers into the raid. We'll talk more about how group loot will function with Race to World First later, but just for my guild, the value of running that split has gone way up now, because literally the first week that you do heroic now, if you do 2 heroic runs, you're getting double the loot on your mains, right? It's not like you're just spending double the effort and investing in your future, investing in getting 10% more loot next week. You're getting 100% more loot this week, and you do it again next week, you're getting 100% more loot next week. So split runs are likely to be something that reach down a little bit lower in the world top 100 type thing. It's still not something that I expect that many guilds will do below that rank, but the incentive has definitely gone up to run a split run. When we're talking about what's going to happen in the Race to World First, caveat here, anytime I talk about Race to World First, there's always some idiot in the comments that's like, well, they shouldn't design around that. And yeah, obviously they shouldn't design around that, but it's interesting to think about what will happen. And I suspect that what's going to happen in Race to World First is you're going to see splitting into multiple parallel heroic runs with maybe 4 mains, right? 1 person of each armor type, 1 person of each tier token, and like 26 helpers on heroic week. And as long as they can kill the bosses in those groups, which maybe you have to bring in some more guild characters to make that possible, depending on how the tuning is, then you get to funnel all of the items to those mains. There is a potential for griefing, right? Anybody in the raid can just not pass on the loot, and they can roll for it themselves, and that's always going to be a possibility with this system, right? Is even with it being like group loot, you know, it's not master loot in that anybody involved in the system always has the option to roll for their own item. In practice, in static long-term guilds, that's not going to be something that happens very often, because as soon as somebody does that once, you know, you kick them if they don't give the item to where it's supposed to go, right? But in a short-term, like, helper race to world first type environment, there's going to be a lot of trust there. I'm not sure how guilds will do their best to guarantee that that the loot actually goes to the raiders that they want it on, but it's definitely going to be something that they, you know, I'm sure there will be some instances of loot getting yoinked, but yeah, that's at least how I expect it will work there. So fairly degenerate system for the very high end, but for mid-range guilds, I think that this, I mean, there are a lot of people that did not like the old personal loot style. This does mean you are not early in the tier going to see items go unused. When an item drops off a boss, there's a very good chance it'll be good on somebody. That being said, 5 weeks into a tier, if you drop male shoulders or whatever, male bracers off of a boss every single week, you will start getting to a point where you'll see loot dropping off of a boss that you have nobody good for it to go on. So that is going to be frustrating, and that will happen. But you know, that's just a thing that's going to happen. The other big thing about this is doing Mythic Plus, getting your gear from M+, getting your gear from PvP, getting your crafted gear has gone up in value. In some guilds, there's going to be a bit of a perverse incentive here, because some guilds are going to be, like, imagine that a loot drops, right? And, oh, it's a 20 item level upgrade for you and a 5 eye level upgrade for me. Okay, well, we should obviously give it to the person for whom it's a 20 eye level upgrade. But the reason it's a 20 eye level upgrade for them is they haven't done M+, and I have, right? And so it creates a little bit of a perverse incentive where it's like, actually, if I hadn't done M+, if I hadn't gotten these upgrades out of M+, I would look better for getting this gear from the boss. Now, in a good guild and with good players, hopefully this is not something that people are thinking about and doing, but is definitely going to be a complaint that people will have in lower ranked guilds, is that's going to be people are going to feel like, oh, I spent all this time doing M+, I got all these 272s, and now the 278s are going to other people because I have 272s and they have 250s. The other implication that's important here is especially if you're somebody like a healer or a tank, Mythic Plus is where your items will be coming from if you're in a good guild that's using group loot correctly. So get ready to get all the items you need from there, because you will not be seeing raid items until several weeks in, until the DPS are done with all those items. So yeah, that's a quick look at how I expect the world is going to look in the group loot environment. Personally, I'm kind of mid on making the swap back. My guild's going to make good use of it. I'm fine. I mean, I'm a tank. I will not be getting it. Like, I'm getting a lot less items under this system than I would under the old system, but I don't care about that. I just want my guild to do well. And I think we'll be able to make pretty good use of that. So I think that will be something that works out okay. But I am curious to see how all of these effects work out and whether most guilds end up feeling more positive or more negative about all of the different incentives that this places on them. I'm also hoping that we don't get into a situation where we start running like a third split or a fourth split, because I could see the value being there, and I hate splits. Hate. I'd like the incentive to be less to doing splits rather than more, and this is a change in the opposite direction of that for my guild at least. But yeah, I'll withhold judgment for now. I mean, I think it's nice to see them trying stuff with loot. And I definitely, personal loot, had a lot of problems with the way that it was implemented in Shadowlands. I think that there were other ways they could have gone about trying to fix it, but I'm curious to see how this one works out as well. What do you think? Have I missed something about how this will play in your guild, and how it'll work with you? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.